record. Oh, good. Okay. Just a reminder that we are recording, and also just to keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question, and you're also welcome to ask questions in the chat box. So Amy, I am going to give you permission to share your slides and turn it over to you. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Megan. And hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much for spending this next hour learning more about Reschool and the impetus behind the Prop 19, or the LEAP program, as it's also called. And I will share my screen here in just a second. Megan, I just have a quick question. I'm getting prompts about letting people in. Is that something I have to pay attention to, or could you see those too?
I will cover that.
Okay,
yep.
Great, thanks. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. You just give me just a minute. Oops. There we go. Great. Oops. Okay, so we're here to talk about LEAP. And I thought before I jumped in right away to giving you the nuts and bolts of LEAP, which I certainly will do, I wanted to just share a little bit of the backstory of what led to LEAP, how Reschool became involved in this, what we do, so that you have that context, because I think it's really important. So I'm going to start with this: learning happens everywhere. I mean, I'm talking to a group of people who I know that and live it every day. But, you know, as a parent, I have two young adults now, they're 20 and 23. And as also just as a person who grew up in the world myself, you know, we know that there are a lot of learning experiences that happen when you go to school, of course, but some of the most impactful, I would argue, the ones that for sure have been more impactful for the people in my life have been things that happened when I wasn't in school, experiences I had outside of school in the summer, travels, breaks, you name it, you know, and that world of learning that happens everywhere is something that at Reschool, we are aiming to try to make it more accessible and more equitable, so all kids can have access to the learning that happens, that they need and want, in whatever setting or wherever it may occur. And so the way that we do our work, and I'll go into some of the details, is we work on trying to break down system barriers that make that learning that happens everywhere less accessible for some. We look to create ways to resource it, and I'll share a little bit about that, and that's a lot of what led to LEAP. And we also support families to navigate learning for their children and with their children, whether that be learning that happens in school or learning that happens beyond the walls of school. Now, I want to just start right here, just because, and we're going to share these slides with you all. So, you know, there are links underneath each of these photos that you can, to reports that you can explore deeper, that share a little bit of the foundational story of Reschool. So, in 2013, I was working, as Megan shared, at the Colorado Department of Education. And I had been at that point a little over 2 decades into my career in education, having done a variety of different things. But most of the work that I had done, like many in the field of education, had been focused on the time that kids spend in school, how to make the schooling experience better or more enriching, or create more opportunities for kids, and look at state policies that would lead to more opportunities for children in public education. And so schools and districts and institutions had been a lot of kind of the work that I'd done over the years to try to tweak and improve upon and make our system as accessible and equitable as possible. And what I realized in sitting there was nagging at me was that there were still a lot of kids that were continuing to not have the experiencing at the end of the day that was leading them to lives that were fulfilling them and that led to the same kind of opportunities as other kids. And we were losing a lot of kids along the way who weren't even making it all the way through the system. And so I thought I needed to kind of step back out and have a different vantage point. And that different vantage point was with families who were in communities and in areas that may be different from where I was typically navigating. And so in starting Reschool, our goal was simply just to say, how can we partner with local communities and parents and invest in their ideas and co-design new solutions that will make the educational experience for their children, wherever it happens, more fulfilling for them, and that will lead to greater opportunity. And so I share these two documents because our initial work was literally shadowing families who we were connected to. So in a new vision for early learners, we walked through the process of how we lived a day in the life of a number of different kids and their parents as they were navigating their learning and their childcare and their needs throughout the day. And we kind of talked with them and lived through that day with them to start to surface what are the opportunities that kids were seeking and that they were finding success at. What were the things that parents wish their children had access to, but they didn't, because they didn't have the resources or they didn't have information that they needed in order to know where to find them? What were the experiences that they had as adults that they wanted their kids to have access to? And from that experience, we learned a great deal, and some really cool ideas started to surface. And we brought some of those ideas back to families after we did some analysis, and started to brainstorm what would be some solutions to addressing the opportunities and challenge that they had surfaced. We also shared those ideas with some people in the education community to brainstorm solutions as well. And what came of that is laid out in a new vision for early learners, which is 10 concepts that families found of great interest, that those concepts were available, that they would engage with them, and they thought that would make it a better experience for their kids to learn for a variety of reasons. We asked them to help us prioritize those 10 concepts, and we chose 3. And that the next resource there, the opportunity to learn, was our first attempt to do a prototype in partnership with the families to test these concepts together. And the 3 concepts that emerged that are relevant to today's conversation and that have influenced our work ever since then is that families needed access to information. They wanted to know where to look when they were trying to find learning experiences for their kids that aligned with where they lived, where they worked, what their kids' interests were, what they cost. Did they speak different languages? Who leads those experiences? So there was a lot of information that they didn't have, and so providing information in different ways was something that they were asking for. They were also asking for money, basically, some resources, because as we all know, when you go attend a summer camp or want to take an art class or want to go have an experience at a museum, those things typically cost money, and not everybody has access to the same resources. The third thing that they were asking for was some support to navigate the system barriers. Like, as they have tried and experienced different things, navigating different systems of learning, they bumped up against challenges along the way. And they thought it would be helpful to have someone who could walk alongside them as a navigator or coach to help them navigate that experience and develop a stronger capacity to advocate for their child. And that's what we call learner advocates. So I'm just sharing all of this because that work that started in that early prototyping and shadowing has been iterated on over the years, but that Reschool has worked on and that partners that we've partnered with have iterated on. And so this idea of exploring learning opportunities started as a booklet where we essentially sat down with the families who had initially been part of our shadowing experience and said, okay, if you're interested in having resources, having information, and having support of an advocate, what if we gave you a debit card for the summer of $250 for each child that you had, that you could spend on learning of your choosing for their needs? What if we found advocates and paired you with advocates to support you in that process? And what if you then had information to make informed decisions? The advocates that we chose for that initial prototype were parents who lived in the community, who ended up being advocates, not only for themselves, but to support other parents to navigate the system. And collectively, they spent those debit cards over the course of the summer. That has since turned into the housing authority that we partnered with for that initial prototype, has continued to run that program now since 2015 every year, and they resource it in Boulder. We at Reschool have run learner advocate networks that we do in partnership with 2 employers in town. Those employers provide the benefit of learner advocates who are on our staff to support parents to navigate learning for their children. Most of the learning that they're looking for is when they're at work. So they're looking for ways to resource their kids' learning needs during the summer, after school, during school breaks, etc. And on top of that, we've run Learning Dollar funds. So that very first fund that was with those families in Boulder was $3,500, and it was for 7 families, very small, and 20 kids. Fast forward, we've run funds in different ways each year. The second year and third year we ran funds, we did 2 different things. We provided funds for parents that were part of our learner advocate network at the 2 hospitals. And we also matched scholarship funds that learning providers in the community already had available, that they made available for kids for lower income households, so that they could offer more scholarships to more kids so that they could come to their programming. And again, these are, for programs that were either sometimes free for students, and then they could add capacity and offer more programming because of that. And sometimes they were programs that were fee for service, and then they just offered those programs for free or reduced cost to more families. And then fast forward to this past summer, and the summer before this, where we ran the first public facing Learning Dollar funds, where we made learning funding available for people across the state to utilize towards their learning needs. Last summer's fund that we ran was $25,000, which was, not a ton of money, but it reached quite a few families. It reached 160 kids across the state. And we actually sent cash to parents. And the purpose of that fund was to support families who've been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic at that stage, to support learning needs that they had for their children over the summer following that initial lockdown and remote learning. The fund we ran in 2021 was meant to mimic as best as possible how it looks like the LEAP fund will play out if it is passed by voters in November. And in that situation, families from across the state, 800 kids, 350 families, received $500 per eligible child. An eligible child was between 5 and 17. So a family of 3 would receive $1,500 if they had 3 eligible children. And they were able to spend those learning funds to support their children's learning needs over the summer for experiences and resources and other kinds of activities. And instead of getting cash like we had done the summer before, the way we envision that we see the LEAP program playing out is that they receive access to a learning account over the summer. They were able to direct funding from that account towards learning providers of their choosing. And that's how the fund worked over the summer. And that was $400,000. And so that $3,500 fund that started in 2015 has evolved and grown to what was $400,000 this past summer to kids across the state. If LEAP were to pass, it would become $150 million a year when it's at its full capacity for kids across Colorado to have access to learning accounts. So what is LEAP, and how would it work? Well, it's designed to be an additive. We know that it's not the end all be all. Like kids are in school for 20% of their waking hours every year. If they're lucky to be able to get to go to an after school program that's offered near or at their school, that might take up another, 10, 15, 20% of their time beyond the time that they're in school. Then there's still that whole 60% plus of time that kids are doing things beyond the walls of school, where they might want to pursue things that they're not getting from these other experiences. Like they might want to learn how to play the violin. They might need to take driver's ed so they can get to a job that they want to have. They might need tutoring in math or reading or literacy, or they want to learn how to hip hop dance or go to the School of Rock like my son did. There's a lot of different things that kids need and want in that space. They might just need kits and resources that they can use in their homes while their parents are there, but maybe working from home and as a thing to keep them occupied while their parents are around. So that's what LEAP is intended to do. And it's designed to be in response to what we've heard from families telling us over all of these years that they want and need. Like, families who have resources are able to take a look at their children and say, oh my gosh, my daughter is an amazing soccer player. I want her to have more opportunities in soccer. How do I resource that? We want the same thing for families who have historically had less resources to access that world. And that's what we hope LEAP can help to start to close that gap. We also see it as an opportunity for providers, like many of you, as well as new providers to the marketplace, to try new things, to expand the programming that you have and try new things with families in your community, or to start new programming in response to demands that exist, or to expand programming where gaps and shortages exist. So this is how LEAP would work. It's much like I described the summer pilot we did this past summer, where families who are eligible, have children who are eligible, will be between 5 and 17 years old to start. And they can apply annually to the LEAP Authority, which would be a new agency that's created underneath the Colorado Department of Education. And they can apply for learning accounts for their children every year. In the first year or two, I think it is, it's designed to be at least $1,500 per child of funding that can be used over the course of a year for learning outside of school. Families will never get cash. It will actually be an account that they will direct funds from that account to learning providers, which is the second bullet. Learning providers must be certified by the Learning Authority. So there is some vetting that goes into ensuring that there are providers in place that are going to be quality and safe and accessible for kids. And families can then direct funds from their account into those learning providers that are certified by the Learning Authority. And then allowed uses for the funds. And again, this is kind of going back to everything that we've heard from parents and communities over the years, is it's empowering for families to have access to resources that they can use in any given year, in any given moment, that are responsive to the needs of their kids, whether those be challenges that their kids face. Like we've had families use learning dollars for things like adaptive devices for children with learning disabilities. We've had parents use resources for tutoring if their kids are struggling in math or literacy or other areas. We have had families use learning dollars for sports, equipment, uniforms so that they can participate in sports, books, maker kits that they can use in the home, summer camps, you name it. Like, we want to make sure that the funds are flexible and learner-centered.
Amy, I had a couple questions for you. Someone was wondering, can the funds be spent on childcare or babysitting?
They have to be spent on, so, I mean, yes, to the extent like childcare is a really interesting one. Like, I know I looked at summer camps for my kids as partly childcare, well, because I was working, but also a great learning experience for them over the summer. So can it be paid? Can it be used for like a nanny that comes to your house or something like that? No, but if it's a learning experience, it can be used for like after school programming. A lot of people utilize that opportunity for childcare for their children. So in that sense, yes. Yeah.
And do families have to submit documentation on how the funds are spent, or will that happen through this process that's in place with the account?
Yeah, it'll happen directly through the account. So, because the funds they're actually being directed from the Learning Authority to whatever the parents have chosen. And we've been doing this now with our funds too, that there's analytics on the back end that show where the money was directed and for what purpose. And so there's an ability to track that at the Learning Authority level, as well as to do analysis, which we've done too. We've had researchers following us at Reschools through all of the different programs we've run in these areas. And you learn a great deal from what parents are choosing, why they're choosing it, where you see high demand for things, where you see demand, but there's not enough programming. So you can do a lot of work to also kind of analyze that to try to respond to what people seem to be asking for and needing in really important ways. We also know that from running the pilot this past summer that was most closely mirrored how LEAP could work. that we saw some glitches. Like we learned about the technology, what works and what doesn't work when you're having to navigate something that relies so heavily on technology. How do you support families who have language challenges? They don't speak English as their first language. What are the ways that we can support people to navigate a program like LEAP in ways that they will find they won't be frustrated with it, and they'll find it that it's user friendly. And so that's all critically important to ensuring the success of the program.
Mm-hmm. Amy had another question here about how will the certifying of learning providers be done?
That's still yet to be determined. So let me just jump ahead to, I thought I had a slide on it. The way that the language in the actual initiative itself is just basically saying that they must be certified in order for parents to be able to utilize their funds, and that the LEAP Authority will be the entity that certifies them. But if LEAP passes in November, then the governor is actually responsible for appointing the board that will run LEAP by January. And then that board will hire the executive director, and that governing entity and CEO will be responsible for setting up the criteria and doing, kind of defining a lot of the parameters of the program. However, there has been, in preparation for that and building off of all the learnings that we and others have had over the years, there is a group of people that is working in various ways to try to make recommendations and do some research and analysis, so that if the initiative passes, that group of the governing board and the executive director aren't starting from scratch. That there's a lot of things that have been kind of analyzed and recommendations that can be made to them, so that they can kind of hit the ground running, hopefully with a lot of important work under their belt.
Thank you.
So I'm almost done with this, and then we can just completely open it up for Q&A. This is just the last slide, which is just sharing how LEAP would be resourced. It's primarily funded through a phased-in increase on recreational marijuana, a tax increase, and there is some additional revenue that's coming from state lands, the state land board, and it's a new funding source. So it's not taking money from an existing pool of money and reallocating it to something else. In the way, we didn't want this to be something that took away from one to put into something else, that it's an additive. And with that, that's kind of the nuts and bolts about LEAP, and that's my contact information, for afterwards. If anyone wants to reach out, we can share the slides. But in the meantime, I would love to see what additional questions you all have. I have some that were sent to me in advance, so I can also address some of those too. And I think I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, super. Thank you. Let's see. I'm just looking at the chat box. A question here is, how much of the funding is earmarked to fund the state authority?
It's not more than 10% can be used for the authority and administrative related kinds of expenses.
And I think you had talked about some examples where free programs were able to expand through these funds. Did I hear that correctly? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I've been talking. There have been primarily some of the different boys and girls clubs around the state have reached out to us to try to brainstorm some ways that to kind of pilot new concepts that maybe are ideas that you want to pursue that offer maybe a different kind of opportunity for kids than what you've typically been providing. Or I could even see like a boys and girls clubs being incredible, like learner advocates, supporting kids to navigate an even broader array of learning experiences where they already have very trusted relationships with the kids that come to their programming to help connect them out to other things. So to the extent that there are things like that, that parents will, can bring their LEAP dollars to direct them towards those organizations for that additional set of services and opportunities. That's how those programs could expand their programming in response to LEAP. I'm sure there's lots of other ideas, but those are just a couple that have surfaced.
Okay, so it sounds like it would be like creating almost a new program in a way within the organization.
Yeah,
Okay,
a new program, a new service, expanding, to new markets, but with a different business model potentially that you want to try.
Okay. Okay. Feel free, if anybody has a question, to unmute, go ahead and unmute and ask. I did send some to Amy in advance. So here's one. What impact do you think LEAP will have on the after school and summer industry?
I hope it's a really positive impact. As we've worked with a lot of different learning providers over the past several years, running Blueprint for Summer and some of our other sites that help parents find information about learning. We've heard a few different things. One, we've heard that there's a lot of out-of-school providers that want to reach a more diverse array of kids, and often they haven't been able to offer programming at a price point or in a way that kids could afford, and so we're hoping that opening up LEAP provides an opportunity for more kids to try a variety of different programs that they might not otherwise have before, and then that makes providers, it fulfills their desire to serve a more diverse clientele. But we also see, like, we've talked with a lot of teachers, and there are teachers who do side hustles all the time, after school, summers, they a lot of times they do them for free. Other times they charge, but only like more affluent kids can afford, like the teacher summer camp at, school X, Y, or Z. And we think that, this is an opening a marketplace for educators to have like a side gig in the summertime where they tutor or they offer camps for kids or you name it. And then we also see, a lot of the providers that we've worked with closely over the past few years have been in close proximity to communities of color and work alongside children who have had similar lived experiences as theirs in growing up. And we see a lot of families wanting things for their kids in the out of school space where they might not get during school, actually learning from people who look like them, learning about their identities, exploring interesting concepts about who they are as people and what they want to do in their lives with people they trust. So that's, I think, another important opportunity too. It looks like Diana had a question I saw pop up. And Diana, I don't know if you remember, but when I was talking about that first, prototype where we brought the booklet and we vetted some of those ideas with people, you were one of them. And way back when. So who is the target population that LEAP is trying to reach? How will this be allocated statewide through learning accounts? What documentation will be required for participation? All great questions. So the target population that LEAP is trying to reach is, it's technically open to all. However, funds are prioritized based on income level. So families from the lowest income homes, which is, I think, it's based on 100 times, I think 200 times and 300 times the poverty levels is kind of where it starts out. So I think it's somewhere in the ballpark of like families that will receive first priority are somewhere around earn for $35,000 as a household for like a family of 4 total per year. And then it bumps up, to the next level, which I think is somewhere around the ballpark of $50,000 household income per year for a family, and then up to the next and so forth. So to the extent that there continues to be funding available as it bumps up, then, it can go up. And we've heard a great deal of families from lower and middle income homes who also are just struggling to access this world of learning that sits outside school. So we'll see how popular it is. Money will be, how it will be allocated through the learning accounts is part of what is yet to be determined. The platform that we tried this summer to run the privately funded pilot was through a platform called Class Wallet, which has historically been a place where teachers can go in and have wallets that people donate to that they can direct towards things they need in the classroom. They're trying to adapt that in some ways to be, kind of more of a family wallet kind of concept. but it's not without its challenges. And so we're trying to take what we learned from running the program this summer, what worked and what didn't work, with that kind of an approach where families have to go on and create an account and direct funding, and try to create something that's simpler, because that was a challenge for a lot of people to navigate. But that's how it would work. The intent is that the authority actually pays the providers. Parents don't get the money, but they do get to choose how their money is spent from their accounts. Let's see, what documentation will be required for, again, like we tried to create something that was really simple this summer, where, you could leverage like existing documentation that you've already been approved for to show your eligibility. For example, if you qualified for free and reduced lunch and had a way of showing that, you could use that to show your eligibility. If you receive, public assistance for food or housing or some other things like that, you can show that, so that you're not asking people to reveal any kind of information that is inappropriate or that would prevent some people from participating. So yeah, and then teachers going through a certification, I don't envision teachers who become learning providers would have to be certified in the same way any provider would be. So in that sense, yes. And there's some basic requirements that are written into LEAP about what is required for certification. Demand for programs exceeds supply. I'm not sure I understand. Kate, would you mind explaining a little bit more what you mean by that question?
So my concern with a lot of the educator and childhood related professional worker shortages is, has the proposition been written so that funds can be used in workforce initiatives, particularly recognizing that certain communities are being hit even harder through these economic workforce shortages? Or do the funds have to be directed to the family level or the administration only?
Yeah, so the majority of the funds have to be directed to the family level. I think that, there's room, and this is yet to be determined, but the administration of the program itself, there's going to be certain functions that need to be done centrally, that you do from a central authority, like manage the accounts, run the technology, operational kinds of things. But based on our experiences, there are definitely things that are going to need to happen that are more close to community, and how can we invest in local communities to support families to navigate LEAP, to support learning providers to get on and want to be part of this opportunity. So I envision, and whether that's coming from the LEAP authority itself and or a combination of that and private philanthropy, that there needs to be investment in communities to grow that workforce, to support families to navigate it, and to spread kind of what I see as the administrative role to a more local context, instead of thinking it has to be all done centrally. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I hope it plays out. But again, I'm not like Reschool has very much been a part of informing the vision and design for something like this, and we endorse it, but we are not running a campaign, and we're certainly not running the authority. Whoever runs that is going to be a different set of people.
Let's see. Will all regions of the state receive access to the program? In other words, are qualifying families in Southwest Colorado on the same footing as qualifying families in the Denver metro area?
Yes, this is intended to reach families all across the state. LEAP, it's not directed towards certain communities and not others at all. Where do we find out what those teacher requirements are? There's some basic requirements written into the initiative around certifying learning providers. And there are things like, at this stage, and again, there's a highly likely chance that on top of the basic requirements that the LEAP authority and its staff and governing board will and have the ability to create different additional requirements or things once it gets created. But they're pretty basic in the initiative language, and I don't have it in front of me here, but if I'm remembering right, it's like they have to become like an official entity that can operate within the state of Colorado. They need to have liability coverage and insurance. They need to go through, background checks to ensure that they are, safe for kids. Like there's things like that that are just more kind of assurances. And then beyond that, we'll see what is created.
Amy, since Reschool has been part of the pilot of this, would Reschool continue to be involved with it if it passes? Like what would Reschool's role be in LEAP if it passes?
I mean, where we see some opportunities for us to continue to work, play alongside LEAP and support communities is it leaning more deeply into the work that we already do. So I was sharing a little bit about our learner advocate work, obviously continuing to support families that are in our existing network to navigate the LEAP program is something we will do naturally. But through our partnerships over the years, and especially the ones this past summer running the pilot, we see a tremendous value in partnering with organizations that are embedded in communities that are family facing and having a community of practice that we're calling like an advocate community of practice, learner advocate, where we are all supporting families in different places to navigate learning and LEAP and sharing how that's going and resourcing and learning from each other, so that we're creating a much more networked approach to this learner advocate concept instead of it being something that somebody runs centrally in like a couple of employers, kind of how we've been doing it now. So that's one idea. We also, as I was sharing, we've been investing in people and organizations that offer programming that's filling unique niches in communities, or that is working in close proximity to communities of color, lower income communities. We want to continue to do that work and invest in those ideas so that that kind of programming can continue to grow and can grow in places where it's most needed. And we also want to continue to run like our Discover Learning site, where if families want to, just before they're ready to spend their money, they can explore what's out there in their communities that might be, LEAP partnered, and then they can then know where they want to go spend their funds when they go to the LEAP authority. So those are just a few ways that I see us continuing. And I also want to make sure that part of our role is to, hold the LEAP authority, accountable for doing what, it was intended to do. And you're going to need a bunch of different people and groups in the community to play that role as well.
Thank you. So what happens if this doesn't pass in November? What would the next steps be?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know if, this has been, just the idea of creating this initiative has been a multi-year process, right? Like 3 years in the making in an official way, and a bunch of years before that, just trying things out that led to it. So I don't know if we have built, thanks in large part, I think, to the experiences we've all been dealing with during this pandemic, we have been able to build a very large coalition of people who's super supportive and sees the value in a concept like this. We probably would need to regroup, all of us, and kind of take a breath and see where we want to head next, given the reality that we're in. So. I have some here that came to me beforehand. I had a question that someone shared about how the ballot's polling. Is there opposition? What is being done to promote it? And it's polling well. Again, I think there's a guttural a response that people are having this year, whether you're coming at this being an educator or a parent or you name it. Like, we've all been dealing with remote learning, remote work, learning challenges that have surfaced because of how we've been experiencing the world of schooling this past year and a half. Missed opportunities that kids really want back in their lives. You know, there's a lot of ways that it resonates with people. So it's polling well on both sides of the aisle. We have some opposition, but it hasn't been very vocal yet. I mean, so, you know, that's, but we'll see where that goes. There's more of a push back from the marijuana industry than anyone else at this stage about them not wanting, you know, the taxes to be increased. How it's been promoted has been, you know, the campaign is running. It launched officially after the signatures were certified, which was in early September. And they're doing things like ads and flyers and opinion pieces and, you know, a lot of the regular campaign type stuff.
Yeah, a couple more that I sent over were what measures will be put in place to prevent a flood of new service providers popping up? And will there be, I don't know, some controls or measures just to prevent them from charging higher fees or, like, you know, charging more than they should?
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, I talked a little bit about the idea that we want to ensure that the providers that are certified are quality, you know, for people, you know. So, I mean, other than that, like, we actually don't want to prevent new providers from popping up. We actually see that there's tremendous need. And there's different kinds of experiences that different parents and kids want based on who they are as people and what their stories are, you know. And so we actually want to support as much as possible programming that does get created that aligns with what people seem to be asking for and needing. And so that's my answer to that. But, you know, in terms of the cost piece, you know, we've actually found through our experiences that families are in our network, especially when they aren't used to having access to resources like this to just spend on their children's needs in this way, like they're very savvy, you know. They actually make the dollar stretch quite a bit. And so I don't, and then they get to decide where the money goes. So if they feel like a provider is offering something that is of value to them at a price point that they think is fair, then all the power to them to go buy it, you know. But if they think it's too expensive, then they're going to choose something else because they're not going to want to spend their money in that way, you know, especially if they have a limited set of resources. So that's how I think it plays out. Obviously, the authority itself is going to have quality assurance mechanisms. And if they also are looking through the data and information and see that there are some providers who are offering something that's like seems way out of the ballpark as compared to what the market, you know, is charging, I think I would foresee and hope that that's something that gets flagged too.
Thank you. Okay, Emily asks, how was the recreational cannabis industry identified and chosen as the primary source of funding?
Well, there were lots of different things that were vetted, and at the end of the day, it was the one that seemed to be the most appealing across a variety of different people, and the one that had less opposition, you know, over some others. So and it worked, and it was able to offer an amount of money that was sufficient to actually run the program at the level that was envisioned. So that's some of the reasons. There's probably others beyond that. I wasn't, you know, totally privy to all of those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Are there opponents to Prop 119 other than the cannabis industry? There are some anti-tax, you know, I've seen some anti-tax pushback, people that any kind of a new tax they're against. So that's one group, but it's I think that's been relatively small. There are some that are advocating that, and you know, education funds, even if this is for out of school, that there still isn't enough money, you know, kind of in the existing K-12 bucket, and that we should be resourcing there. as compared to in other places. That's been some of the questions or pushback, but again, it hasn't, we'll see how, I mean, we still have a few more weeks before the election, and a lot of times, a lot of the more vocal stuff comes up, as it gets closer to an election. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Any other questions from people? I think Amy, you answered a lot of the ones I sent over.
Yeah, I was just looking here if there's anything else. Yeah, I think there was one question about, well, I think I already answered that. Like how families, do we have any data from about how families would use money like for experiences as an after school and summer kind of like programming as compared to other things that they can use their funding for, like equipment or technology or, books, things that they can utilize at home or in their community. I can say we're still crunching the data from this past summer, so I don't have those statistics available right now. Last summer, the fund that we ran, that was a $25,000 fund statewide, directed more towards COVID relief. The majority of that was actually funded not on experiences because we were still kind of pretty much close to lockdown at that stage. And a lot of what people were using their funds for were things that you could do with your small little, like, pod of people that might be in your, family or your maybe local community who you were seeing, or just within your own home. But prior to COVID, prior to the pandemic, and what we're hoping going forward as we come out of it, is that people were overwhelmingly using their learning dollars to resource experiences for their kids, experiences with learning providers in the community. Sometimes online too. There's actually quite a few people who like use resources to do an online class or and things like that. But the majority of people want to use them in their local community with people that they know, with providers that, are in close proximity to their kids. And that it also provides, like we were saying before, a lot of times, people need and want these experiences to coincide with some childcare needs that they have too.
Amy, if it passes, could it be amended in any way? Like, could the legislator get a hold of it and tweak it, like anything like that? Or,
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm guessing yes. I'm guessing that once something passes, there's probably opportunities to do some changing to it. I don't know the mechanics of how that works. Sorry. I mean, there is a lot of opportunity within it, and from my experience when I worked at CDE, like, you try to pass laws generally that don't put you too much into a box, that keep it, that you have an opportunity to have some parameters in place, but that you can, as you run something and you set up whatever the rules and regulations are that are going to run that program at a given time, that if you learn that some things aren't working or that they become barriers or restrictive, that you have some flexibility without having to go back and change laws to adjust those things. And so I think there's always that balance between when you're creating something that's a policy, to create enough flexibility within it to allow those who are implementing it to have, the ability to make changes, and modify to the extent possible, so long as they're not going against the original intent of what the law was or some of those original parameters, in order to make it a better experience for users.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Let's see. Okay.
Thanks, Kate.
Okay, let's read this off. So the Colorado General Assembly may change or repeal initiated measures. In the case of initiated statutes, this only requires a simple majority. In the case of amendments, the Assembly must pass the amendment by a 2/3 majority and place it on the ballot. The same process required for ordinary legislatively referred constitutional amendments. Thank you, Kate. And there's some information there, a link. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, well, I did want to go ahead and share a link to the LEAP website so people can visit that if they'd like to get more information. And that also has the wording of the actual ballot measure is on there, or initiative is on there as well. So you can dig a little deeper if you would like. And then I'm going to just quickly share my screen just to share some upcoming things for CAP. And of course, if anybody has questions later, they can go ahead and email me, or Amy, they could email you. Would that be okay too? Either way?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm at megan@coloradoafterschoolpartnership.org. And then Amy, if you wouldn't mind popping your email in there as well.
Okay, I will. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. All right, thanks everyone for being here. Let me just, before you leave, make sure you know about the upcoming stuff with CAP. So again, we have some discussions coming up, understanding Colorado's OST funding landscape. And Jennifer, I think you're on. Can you share the links to these Open Minds, Open Spaces, our 2-day virtual conference, STEM training in November, and Lights On After School to everybody? Make sure you register your event. CAP is hoping that we can have at least 50 for the state of Colorado. I think last we heard we were up to 21. That was about a week ago. So keep registering your event. It can just even be coloring the light bulbs. That is a great thing to do as well. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a really great day. Have a good week. And I will go ahead and close it up. Thank you so much, Amy. We appreciate you answering all the questions.